Hello again, it's Phil Story, a network detective from Australia, and we're going to continue looking at the NetData performance chart. This time I'd like to delve into more advanced features and also show you as many things as I can so that you can get a good head start if you try it yourself. Reminder, NetData is all about visualizing performance of underlying systems. Performance chart, this visualization aspects really come into play. Today, like yesterday, we'll be looking at the performance chart and its slave tables. I'll add this extra slave chart today. As usual, we'll be looking at the format button in the top left of charts. We'll be zooming in, we'll be using the back button, we'll be right clicking, we'll be hovering the cursor. We'll be looking at how pop-ups act as help in the various windows, and we'll be using our favorite alt keys to deal with the pop-ups. Picking up where we left off in the last video, we're looking at the same packet capture. There's one client doing lots of HTTP to lots of servers. Press this button, this performance chart button, and NetData will do its thing and load the performance chart. Before we touch that, what I really like to show is the load data window. And the load data window here, that's where you get to choose what you want to see. There's a time section up there. You can choose a particular time frame if you like. You get a summary view of how much data is in the capture. But basically, I always go all time transactions of another class. Now, what are they? I'll just hover on that so you can. This is an example of pop-ups acting like online help. I'll leave that there for a second so you can have a read. But I always use that because it lets NetData do more smarts in terms of building higher level pseudo transactions. I always want connections. I always want network events. We're showing statistics for servers. You can have, if you have servers that listen on different ports, you can have a different color for each different port of a particular server. And I always want to see load all. So you see now the chart becomes a little bit more complicated than it was before. But I'll leave that down there for now. We'll just look back at the connections table and just point out one useful thing to look at in the connections table is this closure column. And if I sort that descending and then go to the top, it can be useful to see which connections and how they terminate it. So this is a client final, a server final, and then a client reset. So unusual closures can often tell you something. The colors of the servers here match the colors on the chart. Just play around in there. I mentioned before, in multiple columns, you can just play around with turning things on and turning them off. The events and warnings I always like to see because it's essentially telling us, or NetData telling us, what do you need to know. Now when you've got a large capture and you've got hundreds of rows in here, well, first thing you might do is sort by category, because then we get application type errors at the top. And the other thing you might do, if there's lots of them, and again notice the colors are the same as the chart. So stats gives us a kind of a summarized version of the events. If we sort by count, then we can get a count. What it's done, it's summarized basically saying this server had 94 of these timestamp errors. That server had 8 400s. Minimize those. So now let's get to the real chart. I'll maximize that. Now it looks a bit messy at the moment. We can always move legends and things around like that. We notice that there's these blue stripes in the background. Well, they're fin weight end. What happened to the transactions that we're looking at when various things happened in the background. Now it is a bit messy. So format control window. And what I want to do is just look at some of these things. So connections are already turned on, and we have these different colored lines, and the lines match the colors of the servers. So we can getting a per server connection count. But we'll turn that off. We can also get per server transactions in progress, and if I replot, pretty closely matches the connections. Or we can have throughput, and throughput will count that. Now before I press go, what we can also do is we can do things like turn the legends off, and we can turn on seconds at the top of the chart. So when I do that, you notice we've now got a timescale at the top if you want it. We've also got responses per second, and what we can see is that we have this increasing bursts. I'm going to guess that this traffic was generated by a load generator possibly. We'll go back to the format window. We'll turn those times off at the top and put the legends back on. We'll turn throughput off. Oh, and also turn off the event stripes. Replot. So now we got a slightly neater looking chart. So what is this chart telling us? And that because this symbol is at the right hand side, then it was mostly server time. And if we hover on these things, we can see the breakup. I'll lock that on, Alt-Z. So this was a small request, a small response, but 17.8 seconds of server time, except that the client terminated it. Alt-R, get rid of that. Now what's interesting about this is that there's a different coloured symbol per server. So first of all, we're seeing all of the transactions that were in this capture. We're seeing that a hell of a lot of them were around the 6-second mark, the 12-second mark, and the 18-second mark. Troubleshooting is all about asking questions and things you see. So one question we would have here is it only transactions to one server or a few servers that have the problem? And in fact, we can see, well, no, there's lots and lots of different colours in this 6-second or these long-running ones. Whatever this problem is, it would seem to be it's affecting all servers. And another question we would have would be, there's 3,658 transactions on the page. How many of them were slow? And so we can use this distribution chart. So it's a frequency distribution histogram of the timing of the transactions. If I hover there, Alt-Z, we can see that 1861 were less than, or were in the 10 millisecond category. Now there's a cross-hatching of different colours here. So again, let's look at the format, and here are the different things that in the format distribution, the different things you can have histogram charts for. And just to make things neater, I'm going to not look at overall, I'm just going to look at server times and replot. So now we've got a slightly neater chart. It's all yellow because that's server time, and we can do things like lock on Alt-Y, Alt-Z, and lock on various timings. We're zoomed into just 2 seconds here, and these coloured things, this is the mean. So the mean is 600 milliseconds. These coloured bars are the confidence intervals. This is up there, the first standard deviation and the second standard deviation. But we want to right click out to the right, because what we know is that there were some 18-second ones. So now we're looking at 12 seconds. So there were that many transactions, 44, greater than 12 seconds. There's this little cluster at the 6-second mark. So 2,847 of them were in the 58 millisecond bucket. And then we can also hover on this line here. And this line is tracking Alt-Y, Alt-Z. 91% were less than the average, and less than 600 milliseconds. And we can just come out here, Alt-Z, Alt-Z, and we just basically get these statistics. Alt-X, Alt-Z. So there's a chart that we could put in our report, but we know that the percentage of transactions that took a long time was actually quite low. While I'm here, I'll just do another right click. You can add your own pop-up message, and so we could say something like, and attach that. And again, this is all about using the charts to go into your report and make things easy to present. Distribution chart. So what else do we want to see here? So here's our statistics table that we saw, and we've got the color coding by server. So these are statistics by server now. Sort by count there. This is that particular server. Give the IP address up there. If I pick this one or this one, there's two different kinds of SYN packets. One with a window scale of 2 and some with a window scale of 8. But the point I'm trying to make here is that because we're looking at things color-coded by servers, then all the statistics here are by server. And so zooming in, what we might want to do, we see that there's a cluster of activity down here, so we can zoom, click and drag. Oh, some more interesting there, click and drag. The chart scale, these transactions, because they're so long, are sort of squashing these down the bottom. So what we can do is right-click and say set largest response time. And basically, that's going to pull those transactions up from the bottom. And we might want to look for patterns. There's a pattern here which looks like a server queuing pattern. All these transactions begin at the same time, but they finish in this triangular pattern. So it would appear that they are going into a queue. And here's some transactions with pink squares. This is a 394 byte response to that server, 143 milliseconds of server thinking time, 193 kilobytes of data was returned in 800 milliseconds. Here's another one with a pink square. So that's the kind of thing we can see visually on these charts. Unzoom, we go back, all the way to the beginning. Oh, and right-click, right-click, right-click at the top. Right-click at the top undoes the zooming vertically that we were doing. So here we are back to the beginning. So load data again. Now do statistics for clients. So colors are going to be by client. Load all data again. Yes. Clear everything out. But now everything's red because there's only one color because there's only one client. So we don't need a legend for that, and it's in the heading. Format control window. So now things like throughput might be more interesting. So this is the throughput line for all transactions, not just by server. Format again. Concurrent connections. The current connection is the black line now. So nothing particularly interesting there. We'd be looking for flat lines. So turn off concurrent connections and we'll have transactions in progress. And you can have all these things on at the same time if you want a really complicated chart. But yeah, transactions in progress kind of closely follows the concurrent connections, which makes sense. But what might be more interesting now is stats. The stats are by the client. So there is in fact only one. There's really only one row for the client. All of them at once. So sort by count. And now we can see that there were 1,700 of these kind of connection setups with a window scale of 2 and 118 with a window scale of 8. So that would appear to be two different clients. And we can see this HTTP status code 400, there was actually a few of those, and they might be worth a look. The final thing I wanted to show is back to this transaction mix chart, because now this is a transaction mix for all of the transactions. In terms of rate, there were many more connection setups than anything else. If we wanted to improve this whole system, this is the transaction that we'd want to look at first. However, this is these request unknowns, and in fact I can tell you now, we'll see in a future video that they're in fact red herrings. Given that we know that, we can do right click, remove this type from mix, and it will go away from this chart. And then we can say, oh, what are we interested in next? Well, these posts. Well, I hope that's given you a good head start into using NetData yourself. Let me know in the comments if there's any feedback. Bye for now.